We are here today with Fulgencio Batista, the former dictator of Cuba who is currently retired and living in Spain.
Okay, I'm Sandy Rivers, and here today we have Fulgencio Batista, former dictator of Cuba, and we're going to ask him a few questions about himself. So tell me, how was your childhood? How did you grow up?
Well, Sandy, I was born in Baines, Cuba, to a poor family of impoverished farmers. I worked a wide variety of jobs to help out my family, including picking sugarcane. I started to go to a night school taught by American Quakers, but I left when I was 9 in order to become a tailor's apprentice. When I was 20, after working multiple jobs, I enlisted in the National Army as a recruit.
Okay, so Fulgencio, how did you start out in the military?
I joined the Army in 1921, starting as a stenographer. I then rose to the rank of sergeant and later gained a large personal following.
So Fulgencio, once that you were in the military, what really got you into politics and wanting to change Cuba?
Well, Sandy, Gerardo Machado came to power in 1924 with a lot of initial support. He built up the military and started on an extensive public works program to work on the Central Highway in 1927. Things were seemingly looking up for Cuba until his decision to run for a second term. When riots and demonstrations against him ensued, he closed the University of Havana and exiled many Spanish labor leaders.
Really? So things weren't doing so well in Cuba?
No, they really weren't.
Okay, so now that we're out of that inclement weather, let's get back to business. So if the Machado regime wasn't going so well, why was he still in power? Well, Machado called on the Cuban military to carry out more and more repression against the rising opposition against him. Many of the rebelling students and faculty members at the University of Havana were arrested due to charges of conspiracy to overthrow the government in 1931. Cuba was not in a very good position at that point, and the opposition groups like the ABC, the DEU, the URC, and the CNOC, they began to counteract Machado's violence with their own violence. And unemployment was at an all-time high in Cuba, and yet the United States continued to support the current Cuban regime.
That's just bad news. So, what was the result of the opposition to Machado?
Well, in the September of 1932, the ABC eventually assassinated the president of the Cuban Senate, which catapulted Cuba in a downward spiral towards near anarchy. Eventually, the United States and the military began to lose faith in Machado, and Machado and his cabinet resigned and left the Secretary of War, General Alberto Herrera, in charge. Herrera quickly turned the presidency over to Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, and this tense period was really tough for the military since we didn't really want to support the anti-Machado factions that would want to restructure and reduce the size of the military forces. And then there was an issue ordered out by Céspedes which limited the ability of surgeons such as myself to move up in rank, and also they proposed reductions in our pay. This was extremely unfair to the work that I and a lot of the other surgeons had put into our time in the military, so I decided to lead my own revolt against the officers, starting in my own Camp Columbia in Havana. I was done dealing with the corrupt government and wanted to take matters into my own hands. My growing surgeons' revolution gained support among other enlisted men, and we joined forces with the students to take control of the Cuban government.
So, if you could go really far into depth about what actually went down back when you took control over your home country of Cuba.
Good question. Well, when my coup took control of the government in 1933, a 5-member presidency was set up among the different anti-Machado factions. I wasn't a part of this 5-member group, but I actually had the real power. I was put in control as commander of the military. So when Ramon San Martin was named president, I effectively had control of the government. They were merely puppets under my own control, since I had little faith in many of the leaders that they put in the presidency. So I made sure they had as little power as possible until I could secure a presidency for myself. And
I served as president from 1940 up until 1944. I implemented multiple social reforms, including creating rural hospitals, minimum wage legislation, and public works projects. Growing up in such a poor environment as a child, I sought to create positive change in the Cuban government.
So everything seemed to be going well for you. What happened?
When my term was over, I took a leave of absence from the presidency and politics. I decided to live over in the United States in Florida for the next 8 years. I had hoped that my intended successor would take over for me. However, he lost the presidency. Unfortunately, the Cuban government did not continue the path I had hoped, and corruption ensued. In 1952, I returned from the United States to Cuba and took back the government. It was fairly easy with the support of the military, and I seized power swiftly and without bloodshed. When I came back into power, the economy soared. I needed to secure my power to make sure that everything stayed on course. So I was forced to tighten up control. I couldn't trust anyone to keep the power anymore, so I took matters into my own hands.
Jazz hands.
So tell me, did you face any opposition at all?
I did face some opposition from rebel forces. One such individual, Fidel Castro, led to multiple guerrilla attacks against my government. We were able to calm the attacks and apprehend those responsible, including Castro. Things were all going well under my control. I promised to hold an election in 1954, which I won fairly with full support. I even had the support of the US government. This was when I made a drastic mistake in giving amnesty to all prisoners, including Castro and his men. Sorry, set up throat. Over the next few years, Castro tried attacking me in speeches, on the radio, and through newspaper articles that I needed to censor to keep the government in good standing. However, Castro kept gaining more supporters and attacking my regime. In 1957, an attack on my presidential palace nearly succeeded in killing me. I barely escaped my life. I was determined to stay in power, but things looked dim. The United States sent a representative in 1958 to offer me and my family safety in Florida, but I faithfully denied the offer. I was still confident in my ability to rule. The rebel forces under Castro eventually overwhelmed us, and on December 31st, 1958, we lost control, and I had to escape to the Dominican Republic to survive.
Wow.
It was tragic.
Well, nice
meeting you, sir.
Have a good day.
You too.
Batista later died August 6, 1973, because of a heart attack.